It's our purpose to bring to bear the principle of common sense and rational discussion to the issues of our day. America was created at a time of great turmoil, tremendous disagreements, anger, hatred. There was a book written in 1776 that guided much of the discipline of thinking that brought us to the discovery of our freedoms, of our God-given freedoms. It was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, written in 1776, one of the first American bestsellers, in which Thomas Paine explained by rational principles the reason why these small colonies felt the necessity to separate from the powerful Kingdom of England and the King of England. He explained their inherent desire for liberty, freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and he explained it in ways that were understandable to the people, to all of the people. A great deal of the reason for America's constant ability to self-improve is because we are able to reason, we're able to talk to each other, we're able to listen to each other, and we're able to analyze. We are able to apply our God-given common sense. So let's do it. Welcome back. This is Rudy-Giuliani, and this is Rudy's Common Sense. And I have with me today two very, very fine lawyers and two very good friends. I think you all know who they are. Victoria Tenzing and Joe DeGeneva, two lawyers that have been active in so many high-profile cases that just too many to mention. But they have a very, very clear understanding of what's going on in Washington, what's going on in politics, and I couldn't think of having two better people to analyze this situation with China and the politics of it as well as the substance of it. Vicky, Joe, looks like you're on vacation.
We are.
Yeah, you're on a forced vacation, right? So let's get right to it. The reality is that the Democrats are trying very, very hard to use this as blame it on Trump. Trump is responsible for this COVID-19 thing. It reflects itself in some of the poll numbers. So I don't know how valid those polls are, but that's going to give them even more incentive to keep blaming it on Trump. I guess the charge against him is he waited too long to say it was very dangerous. However, on the other side of it, there really seems to be a total explanation for who's to blame for it. So how would you deal with this? I mean, how would you deal with it, first of all, substantively, and how would you deal with it politically?
Oh, Rudy, he has got to continue talking to the people in the daily press conferences, because if he just talks to the press or doesn't say anything, they're always going to distort what he did. Listen, Churchill during World War II went out and did exactly what Trump is doing. He gave inspiration and hope to the people, and that's what Trump has to continue to do. I love hearing him say, we're going to get better.
I think, Rudy, that it's pretty clear that what the Democrats are doing is they have decided that because they're helping to destroy the economy by demanding that it not be reopened, they're trying to fault him for the collapse of the economy, when in fact, it's pretty clear that when he shut down all travel from China, that was the single most important thing he could do for both public safety, public health, and for the economy, because it shortened the time period. But there's no doubt that the Democrats are playing complete politics with this. It's not about the substance, and it's pretty embarrassing for them. But as you say, it may be having some positive effect for the Democrats. That's why we all have to fight very hard for our guy.
But this is really the biggest turnaround of the truth that I can imagine. The thing he's being charged with, that he didn't react fast enough, actually, he's the one who reacted the fastest. Pelosi, at the time that he was closing off movement with China, Pelosi was encouraging people to go to Chinatown to have dinner, and Cuomo, it took him 2 or 3 weeks to catch up to Trump.
So, Rudy, here's the answer to that. You're absolutely right. When you have a mainstream media that is nothing more than an arm of the Democratic Party, it almost doesn't matter what the facts are. because they're going to ignore everything that the president did, such as his early cutting off of travel from China, while the Chinese were sending their people all over the world purposely. And the media will not want to remember that the president reluctantly cut off flights from Europe as well shortly thereafter. So the Democrats have the best of all worlds. They're able to lie with the complicity of the United States media. And for Trump, it's tough, but he's doing a brilliant job even with that.
They're expecting him to know more than Tony Fauci, Dr. Fauci knew, because at the end of January and beginning of February, when Trump had already cut off travel, Fauci was saying, oh, it's not going to be a really big problem. Look, we had a contrived investigation of Russia collusion, which was never there. We had a contrived impeachment on a phone call that was perfectly legal, but it was based on a law that didn't even fit the investigation for the impeachment. And now we have Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut saying, the virus is Trump's fault. Well, so what else is new?
And the reality is you got to go back a little bit further and you can figure out who's solely responsible for it. The Chinese. I mean, Trump didn't go to Wuhan, the Wuhan market and buy bats, nor have I ever heard of him eating bats. He didn't go to the laboratory and mix medicines together. It was all done by the Chinese communists. They're the ones who did it. They created it and they let it out on the world. Now everybody else has to react to it, and all you're doing is really playing Monday morning quarterbacking and saying, well, how do they react to it? Do they react to it fast enough, slow enough? This is a new virus. It's even understandable that Fauci wouldn't have understood completely what he was dealing with. It's a new virus. They had never dealt with it before.
I think, Rudy, you're absolutely right. What we know is that the Chinese hid from the world the fact that the coronavirus existed, that it was virulent, that it was person-to-person transmittable. And while doing that, while hiding that, they sent their people around the world, knowing that they would transmit the disease. The president acted very, very quickly in cutting off travel from China. And even Dr. Fauci got it wrong when he said it wasn't going to be as bad, as Victoria said in her last answer. This is not about the truth or the facts. It is about the fact that the mainstream media wants to destroy Trump. They want to help defeat him. And you can tell that even though Joe Biden has had a corrupt relationship with mainland China and the Chinese Communist Party, the mainstream media never even mentions it. And yet Biden was able to claim that Trump was covering up for the Chinese when it was in fact Trump who cut off travel from mainland China. It's truly remarkable what the mainstream media is willing to forget and willing to omit.
And Biden has been all over the map with his attitude about China. A year ago, when they were still giving money to his son Hunter, he was saying, hey, the Chinese are good guys. Hey, they're going to eat our lunch. Hey, come on, man. That's not going to happen. And now he's saying in his latest ad just this week, oh, Trump was not tough enough. I would call them up and tell them what for, and they would listen to me.
Well, he probably has some very good friends there. He made a lot of money with them. But I wonder, in their perception, who owns whom?
Well, Rudy, as you well know, Vice President Biden was a one-man grifter show for the Obama administration. Wherever he went, whether it was Ukraine or China, he had his son on Air Force Two cutting deals for the Biden family, whether it was the Burisma gas company in Ukraine or the Chinese communist investment of $1.5 billion in an investment fund that Hunter Biden was a partner in. The truth is, Biden was covering from the Chinese for the last 8 years. And the notion that he would be tougher on the Chinese is an absolute joke.
And here's the pass that the media is giving. Hunter Biden allegedly resigned from that board of directors of BHR Equity Funders last October, and yet no evidence was given of that, and he's still listed as one of the directors. But when he allegedly resigned from that board, he said, well, I don't want it to be a conflict for if my father gets to be president. Why wasn't it a conflict when his father was vice president?
We all know, Joe, he was never the brightest guy in the Senate.
Absolutely. Never the brightest guy in the Senate.
Or in his law school class.
I know someone who went to law school with him, and basically when he got elected to the Senate in Delaware, he said, gee, anybody can get elected to the Senate in Delaware. So, I mean, Joe's always been the nice guy who was kind of dumb, and we let him get away with his dumb statements. But now it turns out that they weren't so dumb. The Biden family enterprise, every time Joe became point man, seems to have turned it into millions of dollars in Iraq, in Ukraine, and then in China, the country we're dealing with right now.
Well, Rudy, I think what's really obvious and clear is what's always been known in the state of Delaware, where I was born and raised. And I have known Joe since we were teenagers together in Delaware. And the Bidens have a reputation in Delaware for being what we call grifters, the kind of people who go around looking for a way to make a buck off of other people unceremoniously. And in the case of public office, no one has been more aggressive in abusing his power of office for the benefit of his family than Joe Biden, whether it's his sister, whether it's his sons, whether it's his brother. They're all involved. They've all made money, and they're all millionaires, whether it's a housing project in Delaware, housing in Iraq, gas companies in Ukraine, investment banking in mainland China. The Bidens have made money off of public service. They make the Clintons look like cheapos.
I think that's right. I think the fact that he's stuck in the basement, of course, it isn't going to help him all that much, but he's not going to hurt himself as much. Also, it's taken away politically the president's rallies, which were powerful political instruments for him, particularly against a weak candidate like Biden, who couldn't possibly carry out one of those rallies.
Well, you're right. Biden is really benefiting from nobody seeing him. This is how has this ever happened in the history of campaigning, that you're better off if you're hiding in the basement than if you're out giving speeches to a bunch of people? But the president is rallying forth every day when he does his press conferences. I wish they'd just be a little bit shorter and he would not get as testy, but he's doing a great job.
I think one of the more interesting things happened the other night when Brit Hume on Fox was being asked to comment by Tucker Carlson about Joe Biden. And Brit was saying that Joe Biden is senile. And he actually used that term, which I think was a proper use of the term. Biden is, in fact, senile. He has problems with mental concentration, with stringing words together. Clearly, he has motor function problems. They're keeping him out of sight. I mean, almost all the things he does. He has his wife, Dr. Jill, a doctor of education, sitting next to him. And even then, it doesn't seem to help. So I think Biden is benefiting by being able to hide. The president at least has his news conferences, but clearly the president misses his rallies. They are a great, great font of support.
I mean, I have no doubt that when you look at the lineup of people who want to take the first step and the second step and the third step, and the people who seem to want to keep us at home for the next 3 months, the Republicans want to start us going again in a responsible way. And the Democrats say, oh, everybody's got to be tested, and it's going to be at least another month, at least another 2 months. The mayor in my city, whose name I don't speak, has now closed the city down for the summer. He's decided no pools during the summer. That's 5 months from now. How does he know what it's going to be like 5 months from now? And no pools in New York City means, kids are going to go swimming in the East River and we're going to lose some of them. I mean, these people have no regard for the consequences of what they're doing.
Well, but here's what happens when a Republican wants to open up something like Brian Kemp in Georgia. He gets maligned by the media, by the local mayors, even by the president a bit. But when a Democrat, Colorado, Jared Polis, when he wants to open up Colorado, hold on, it's a really good thing. Let's get the Coloradans out. So again, there's that double standard.
Well, I mean, of course, this was avoided, but the kind of closure that we did, which is unprecedented. America has never been closed down like this. I can't think of any country that's ever been closed down like this. Virtually the Western world was closed down. There are consequences to that. People die as a result of that. I mean, you have people at home that are fragile. You have people at home that are mentally fragile, emotionally fragile, physically fragile. Some of them are going to die. The fact that you're not doing elective surgery or even the normal care that you have for patients, some people are going to die as a result of that. There's no doubt that there's a price that we paid on the other side for this closure. Suicide hotlines are up 150, 200%. I don't know the exact suicide figures, but there are sure a heck of a lot more people thinking about it than normally think about it. And you can't imagine how domestic violence is up. I mean, we used to have a problem when I was in New York on Super Bowl Sunday. More domestic violence on Super Bowl Sunday than any day of the year because he's home, she's home, his team loses, he's drunk, and he beats her up. There are those people. I mean, we've got a certain percentage of people in our population that are like that. Can you imagine locking them up for 30 days together? So it's not a healthy thing to lock people up. So you should do it for the minimum amount of time and only when absolutely necessary. Not, oh, wow, this is great. No, of course we've made it. We should be allowed to. Look, we all know that we have to stay 6 feet apart. If they would let me out of my house, I promise I'll stay 6 feet apart. I'll keep my mask on. At least I won't frighten children if I have a mask on. And I'll go to a restaurant and maybe they can allow half the people in and we can all be 12 feet apart. I am firmly convinced that any decent American executive, political executive, would take some, at least baby steps now, to get this thing open, just to see, can we open it? If I were the mayor, I would open Broadway, and I'd say, let's do 1/3 of the audience, or 1/4 of the audience. Let's see if we can start it, and get people back into it, and get people back in the phone. That's what I did after 9/11.
It's also not a healthy thing to close all these hospitals. One of the first decisions every governor should have made is that every hospital should be back open if they have the beds and the capacity to handle patients, because elective surgery is testing for cancer. How many people are dying because they can't be tested for illnesses that they have, or who are not being admitted to the hospital because they want to save all their beds for these virus patients? The hospitals have got to get back to work, every single one of them.
And now that we know that the calculus that was used at the beginning of this closing down of the United States was wrong, that the models created by Bill Gates Institute were absolutely wrong, that were off by a factor of 80% on the number of people that would contract it, most importantly, the number of people who would die, off by hundreds and hundreds of, just the percentages are outrageous. And so the calculus has to include the understanding that our calculations were wrong and that we shut down the country probably the wrong way, that we didn't have to do it the way we did it. I don't blame the president for that, and I don't blame all the doctors involved in the decision making. But it is a sign that maybe there ought to be a little bit more humility about these decision makers like Dr. Fauci, St. Anthony, and Dr. Birx. And also, obviously, never going to happen, but from the mainstream media, which adopts every nostrum it can to make Trump look bad.
No, there are, we all know them because they're friends of ours. Now you just multiply that by the entire country. There must be millions of people sitting there wondering, are they going to get their job back? Are they going to be able to keep their business together? Even with the loans, it's possible that a lot of these businesses are going to go under. Things that people work for all their lives get destroyed. Now, okay, if the price for that, if it was necessary to go that far, to save that many lives, but we're at the point now where the cases are declining, it's all going in the other direction, and we're putting more restrictions on. And that doesn't make any sense. It's starting to sound like they want to carry these restrictions into October and November, not just save lives, but for power and greed.
Well, the only thing I can say is I agree 100% with you, Rudy. I think clearly we need to reopen. We need to reopen carefully. I mean, it's idiotic. It goes without saying. Nobody wants to rush and open up everything 100%. But we have to turn this around quickly, because the end result of leaving this on too long is not a recession, it's a depression. And we will not be able to have this economy recover, not just till after the election. It will be years.
And if it's common sense is not used with these decisions, people are really, really going to not only cheat, but just rebel as they're doing. Now, why can't people go out and play on a golf course? I've never played a round of golf in my life, but it seems to me that that's the epitome of distancing yourself from people. And it would help people just get some exercise.
Or walk on a beach, or plant some seeds in your garden. I mean, that idiot governor in Michigan not allowing people to buy seeds so they can go outside and plant in their garden. What a moron.
Great to see you, and stay healthy, my friend.
You too, Rudy. God bless.
Bye.
Two of the best lawyers in America right there. I'd have them if I were in trouble. Thank you very much, Joe and Vicky. It was a pleasure interviewing them. They always are provocative and interesting. And we'll be back in a short while. Thank you. A good security system makes a family feel even more secure at home. Simply Safe does just that. It creates a secure home, and it's simple to operate. Simply Safe reinvented the home security industry years ago when they introduced a wireless system using Wi-Fi signals instead of running wires all throughout your house. That eliminates the need and expense for an installation crew. Simply Safe delivers you a pre-tested, pre-configured set of components that are easy to install. If you can remove crack and peel tape, you can install the system in less than 1 hour. 3 million families and counting in America rely on Simply Safe. Your doors and windows and rooms of your home will all be protected by the sensors and motion detectors. There's sound sensors and HD camera components as well. All of those parts are connected with wireless signals within your home, and once they're connected, you can activate Simply Safe's 24/7 monitoring service. All of that costs you just $14.99 a month with no contract to sign. That connects your system with the local police department for a fast response in the event of a home intrusion. It works in houses, condos, and apartments like mine. SimplySafe.com/Rudy is the site. You'll get a 60-day money-back guarantee and a free HD camera with your purchase. Just go to SimplySafe.com/Rudy and order it today. Don't wait. Thank you. Welcome back. This is Rudy Giuliani to Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. And our guest today is K.T. McFarland, former Deputy Director of the National Security Council for President Trump, someone with a wide range of experience in foreign policy, and someone whose views on what is now going on with regard to this COVID-19 pandemic and the genesis of it and how we have to deal with it in the future are really taken into great, great consideration. Her book, Revolution, is an excellent book. Came out right before this pandemic broke, and it was number one on the bestseller list. It still remains number one on many of the bestseller lists, and I urge you to read it. I think it'd be a great education on, to a very large extent, what happened in the early parts of the Trump administration and some of the horrible ways in which the Mueller people and the FBI conducted themselves, which to me, as someone who devoted a lot of my life to law enforcement, is a great embarrassment. But here we are with K.T. McFarland, and I'd like to ask her right off about how she sees the role of China in this situation.
You know, Rudy, I think China has had a plan, a very well organized and thought out plan for decades. And their goal was to do three things. To replace the United States as the preeminent, most powerful country in the world by mid-century. Their plan was to push the United States out of the South China Sea by 2030. And they were well on their way to doing this before Trump was elected. Push us out of the Pacific by 2040. And then by 2050, be the world's dominant economy, dominating the technology world, have the commanding heights of technology, and be militarily most powerful. And then once China was in that position, similar to the position we were in at the end of World War II, they would rewrite the international rules of order to suit themselves. They will not have a Marshall Plan. They will not be generous to others. Their plan was to be the supreme nation, and everybody else would be vassals falling in line. And what the virus has done is acted like an accelerant. Because whether or not they developed this bioweapon to use as a bioweapon, or whether it came out of a lab or came out of the wet market, it's what they've done since. They have seized this opportunity to do a couple of things. They've seized the opportunity to spread it worldwide. I mean, for example, once they knew they had a problem by mid-late December, what did they do? They locked down Wuhan, the city where it was developed. They wouldn't let anybody leave Wuhan to go to any other part of China. But they let people from Wuhan go all over the world. So that's why they went to Italy, they went to Europe. The Chinese really used it as a biological weapon to spread around the globe. And the other thing is that they knew that they were going to that it would be a pandemic. So what did they do? They bought up all of the masks and testing equipment and anything related to this. They bought a billion masks, for example. And then once they had hoarded them, they turned around to offer them 10 times the price to any country who wanted them. And the price was also that a country could never criticize China. If they criticized China, China wouldn't give them any medical supplies. And so as a result, a lot of countries which wanted to criticize China didn't, because they needed the testing equipment. Well, it turns out they had to pay for it. And it turns out the stuff didn't even work anyway. So China I think it is really a power play on China's part to replace the United States within the next 5 years, not the next 50.
Well, I think people get a sense of this, but if we just go back for a moment, the reality is that China actually first found out about this in early December. The chronologies that were given to us by CNN and MSNBC, and which I'm not even sure they've corrected yet, have it really in late December, that China found out about it in late December. The reality is the first case was on December 1st. The first actual confirmation was on December 7th. So they had the whole month of December, that is totally unaccounted for, to plan what they were going to do about this. They had increasing number of cases. And the reality is that we have no explanation for why they secured Wuhan, let no one leave there and go to another Chinese city, end result being that Beijing, Singapore are not very hard hit by this. On the other hand, they sent out about 1.5 million people all over the globe, almost as carriers of this novel coronavirus. And instead of the people dying in China, the people in Italy, Spain, Austria, Germany, United Kingdom, United States, Canada, they died. Are they so evil that they actually would contemplate a plan to disrupt the West by spreading this highly fatal communicable disease?
Again, I don't know that they planned to do it, but they took advantage of it.
But they had to know. They had to know it was a dangerous...
They knew. Of course they knew.
That's why they didn't let people travel in China. They had to know that they were developing this as a very dangerous weapon for whatever reason, a very dangerous virus. Maybe for the purposes of trying to cure it, maybe for the purpose of trying to, whatever the purpose was, they knew it was a very unusual coronavirus, much more dangerous than the usual coronavirus. It was being developed specifically for that purpose. Now it gets loose. They contain it for China, but they let it come to us. There has to be some deliberation in that.
Well, I think one of the reasons, and you're right about all of that, but one of the reasons that they keep insisting, despite mounting evidence that it came from a lab in Wuhan, they keep insisting, no, it came from the wet market, or maybe it was America that did it. They cannot admit culpability for the following reason. If they do, then there's a clause that they put into the Phase 1 U.S.-China trade deal, where in essence, this trade deal was that we would lift sanctions, we would lift the tariffs on them, and then they would buy a lot of agricultural and other goods from us. But there's a clause that's in there, a get out of jail free clause, which says, however, if there is a natural occurring disaster, the two parties will renegotiate. In other words, China they don't necessarily want to keep the terms of the deal. And so it's very important for everybody, for them, to say, well, it's a naturally occurring disaster come out of the wet lab. It wasn't China that did it. So not only would they give themselves an out for this trade deal that they were pressured into signing, but they also will give themselves an out if countries and companies and individuals all come in the international courts and try to sue China. The countries all over the world are really mad, and they have already started launching lawsuits. The Brits are taking the primary lead in this, of saying China owes us. We want to at least have China forgive us our debt. So I think China has to stick to this increasingly absurd story. Oh, no, it's just a natural disaster. We had nothing to do with it, because they really want to end up looking like the good guys in this, and they certainly don't want to be held responsible.
It's also going to be very, very hard to investigate inside of China because they control everything. Some of the scientists involved have already disappeared. Some of them have changed their testimony. Some can't seem to remember. But the facts are pretty darn clear. This virus comes from China, and China certainly had opportunities to warn the world about the danger of it. And instead of undertaking those opportunities, they avoided them completely. What should we do about it? What should President Trump do about it?
Well, Trump understands this, and I've been in, and although as you know, we are close to these people in the administration, but I don't speak for them. But I know that one of the things that they're considering is that we really need to disengage. We need to decouple our economies. If they want to buy, energy or agricultural goods from us, great. We can buy cheap stuff from them. But we need to take the steps immediately so that we are no longer dependent on China for critical national security supply chains. We've always, as America, we said, well, we're not going to be dependent upon anybody else for food. We're not going to be dependent upon anybody else for component parts to our military. But we now need to add to that to say component parts for our pharmaceuticals industry, component parts for our technology, because there are some reports that the Chinese have said to the White House, we are going to not give you penicillin. China makes most of the penicillin in the world. We are going to deny you having access to penicillin unless you do what we want you to do. So they're trying to blackmail everybody.
Yeah, and I think this has put them in a very, very strong position to do it. On the other hand, it goes so far that you have to expect that a government with any integrity would have to say, this is enough now. We've got to set China back. We can't allow China to be using blackmail of deadly diseases in order to get us to do what they want. And you know this better than I do, but what are the chances that we get some united action from what are very often a very reluctant and, I would say, cowardly Western European governments?
I would have said 3 months ago, zero chance. But a couple of things have happened. I mean, these countries have really been blindsided by China. China's blackmailed them over their statements. They're now facing probably the equivalent of the aftermath of a world war. I mean, this has been a world war. It just happened very quickly. But the consequences of it, the economic consequences, are going to take a decade to recover from. So I always thought that what President Trump's plan was initially in the first term, he would have new trade agreements with China, Canada, Mexico, et cetera. And he's done that. But what that gives him the position to do now is to go back to the countries who are free market systems, which are democracies. So go to Canada, go to Mexico, go to Japan, go to South Korea, go to the Brits, go to Europe and say, we're all getting screwed by China. If China can pick us off one at a time, they'll do it. But united as a block of Western democracies or free market systems, we can go and stand up to China and demand certain things, certain level the playing field things. Without that, I think it'll be very difficult. The other thing that the United States should do, and Trump has also talked about doing this, we need to maintain the technological lead. We haven't put enough investment into research and development and technology, and it's important to do that. The Chinese in the past, they steal our stuff, they buy our stuff, but we need to continue to be the technological leading country, and then make sure that nobody else steals it from us.
And in some places, China has moved in that area. Are you sure? But there's a lot of
artificial intelligence, for example. They're ahead of us in artificial intelligence.
There's a lot of concern in many of those countries that they've gotten too tied in with China, and that you pay a much heavier price with China than with the United States. So there's a real opportunity for us to reintroduce ourselves there. But this is going to change the relationship of the Trump administration with China. It's going to have to become a more contentious relationship.
It's got to.
I mean, just to get us back to square one.
Absolutely. I think that there's no doubt about that. The Chinese, they thought any other president they've been pushing around, Republican or Democrat, nobody stood up to China for the last 20 years. Trump is the first one to stand up to China. And I think that he's got, you know him, I know him. I think he's got the personal courage and resilience and all the things he needs to continue to stand up to China. Their plan was that everybody was just going to roll over. But now I think it's a wake-up call, not only to America, but to a lot of other countries. Hey, wait a minute. There's a lot of strings attached to these Chinese goods that we're getting for very small price. And so I think that there will be an incentive for other countries to follow America's lead, because everybody's been screwed by this. The third world, poor countries, even more so than we have been.
How strong should the reaction be by the United States and whatever allies we can put together with regard to trade, with regard to essential goods?
I would start now. The most important thing that we could do, for example, would be to have a U.S.-UK trade deal right away. It would help the markets in both of our countries, but it would also it would show that there is still life in Western economies and still life in democracies, and then build out from there, and then very quickly move out to try to create relationships and build on the fact that we the United States, we have trade deals with China, but that's not going to be probably even enforced by anybody. But we do have trade agreements and good relations now with Canada, with Mexico, with South Korea, with Japan, with Britain, with parts of Europe, and to build on a U.S.-UK trade deal and then build out from there. But immediately start bringing the supply chains home, using economic incentives and disincentives to get the companies in the United States that have offshored a lot of the stuff that really, who would have thought that masks and hospital gowns were critical national security things? Who would have thought penicillin was? But it turns out they are. And so if Trump can just do the two things: one, bring the supply chains home and work with our allies, and two, to really invest in high technology and then keep it here. Don't let it go to China or any other country that wants to beg, borrow, or steal it.
Well, I think he certainly has the will to do it. There are obviously always contending factions. I find it very interesting that some of the Democrats are kind of defending China. Joe Biden believes that the Chinese really have good motives and that they really aren't a threat to us. He may be the only one who believes that. And some of them, I think, are so intent on blaming it on Trump that they feel if responsibility is really correctly placed on China, it then becomes impossible to really blame it on Trump. But that's a terrible motivation for something that involves national security. I mean, you can play politics with a lot of things, but you can't play politics with the safety of the United States.
Well, but that's what they've done. I mean, Lenin used to call people like that useful idiots. In other words, they are unwittingly damaging their own nation and advancing the interests of the communists. And those critics were, willing, they were unwitting, perhaps. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But they were advancing Russia's interests throughout the whole Russia hoax. And the FBI, it now turns out they knew that it was Russian disinformation, and yet they were pushing it because they hated Trump so much. And now the same group of people are advancing China's interests because they're blaming everything on Trump instead of showing where it really came, where the blame really lies, which is China. And anybody who thinks that the Chinese are nice guys and, oh, they wouldn't hurt us. Well, I trained, Rudy, I don't think you know this, but when I did my doctoral work at MIT, I trained as a defense planner. And the first thing you learn is don't look at a country's intentions, look at their capabilities, because their intentions could change overnight. Their capabilities take a long time to change. I'm looking at China's capabilities. I'm not listening to what they're saying. And their capabilities have me extremely worried.
Militarily, economically, socially?
Yeah.
In all respects?
All of them. In all respects. They're on a propaganda blitz right now. And they've got countries like, Iran, Russia, the World Health Organization, which are parodying their lines. Militarily, they've moved into the South China Sea. They've had a military buildup in the last 10 years. Diplomatically, they go to the Davos International Conference, and Xi Jinping acts like he's the world's savior. Technologically, they're advanced, more advanced than we are in artificial intelligence, and they have a plan called Made in China 2025, where they plan to dominate the 10 technologies of the future, and so that everybody's dependent on China for those technologies. They're building a One Belt, One Road. It's a land route, a trade route linking Europe and the Middle East and South Asia to China, similar to what the Romans did in the Roman Empire. They have a maritime route that they're doing the same thing with. And they're then trying to have the 5G. Basically, it's the infrastructure of the internet that they want to control. China's on the roll. They have very specific and definitive steps that they're taking to try to really be the dominant power, not just for the next couple of years, but for the next several centuries.
Well, I think this is going to be quite the challenge. I think we have the president to handle it, but it's still going to be a very daunting challenge. And they sure dramatized it. I'm not sure in a way that they really wanted to. In some ways, this could be a mistake by China. It reminds me of the ending of the movie Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese general says, "I fear that we've awakened the sleeping giant." This might very well have awakened us.
Rudy, you have absolutely encapsulated the whole thing. Yes, America was really being lulled into this sort of Joe Biden saying, "Oh, China, nothing to worry about." But I think you're right. This has been a wake-up call for all of us.
Thank you very, very much for your participating in this, and your opinions on these things are really very, very much of value because of your experience. So please stay involved.
Thank you. I have every intention.
Stay safe.